The morning started with whispers. I noticed them the moment I walked into the office. People who normally greeted me suddenly looked away. 2 coworkers near the coffee machine stopped talking the second I stepped closer. Something felt wrong. I placed my bag on my desk and turned on my computer, pretending not to notice the strange looks. But inside my stomach felt tight. A message popped up on my screen. Meeting with management at 10 a.m. No explanation. Just that. Meetings with management were rarely good news. They usually meant someone had made a mistake, missed a deadline, or worse. Across the room, one of my coworkers glanced at me and then quickly looked down. Another one shook their head slightly. The whispers started again. I tried to focus on my work, but it was impossible. My mind kept replaying every task I had done over the past week. Had I missed something? Had I made a mistake? At exactly 10 o'clock, another message appeared. Please come to the conference room. I stood up slowly. The office felt unusually quiet as I walked across the floor. Few people watched me pass. One person even looked sympathetic. That made my heart sink even more. By the time I reached the conference room door, my hands felt cold. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside sat 3 senior managers and the director of the department. They all looked serious. No smiles. No greetings. Just silence. One of them finally spoke. Please sit down. As I pulled the chair closer to the table, a strange thought crossed my mind. Everyone outside seemed sure this meeting would be the worst moment of my career. But they had no idea what was about to happen. And honestly, neither did I. I sat down slowly, trying to keep my face calm. The room felt heavy with silence. The director folded their hands on the table and looked directly at me. Do you know why we called you here today? They asked. I shook my head. No. One of the managers glanced at a folder in front of them. We've been reviewing several reports from the last quarter, they said. My chest tightened. Reports. That could mean anything. Late submissions. Budget problems. Project mistakes. My mind raced through every assignment I had worked on. I had stayed late many nights to make sure everything was correct. Still doubt crept in. Maybe something had slipped through. Another manager leaned forward. Some concerns were raised about recent projects, they said carefully. Concerns. That word sounded dangerous. Concerns about what? I asked quietly. The director exchanged a quick glance with the others before answering. About performance. For a moment my heart dropped. Performance reviews could change everything. If things were bad, I could lose the job I had worked so hard to keep. I thought about the long nights. The weekends I spent finishing reports. The times I helped coworkers fix problems even when it wasn't my responsibility. Had it all been pointless? The director opened the folder slowly. Pages filled with numbers and notes were inside. This review took several weeks, they said. I swallowed. Outside the conference room, I could see shadows moving behind the glass wall. People were watching, waiting, probably expecting the worst. But the director wasn't finished speaking yet. And the next words would change everything. The director turned one page in the folder and looked back at me. Before we continue, they said, we want you to understand something important. I nodded quietly. This review was not started because of a complaint, the director continued. That surprised me. I had been preparing myself to hear about mistakes or problems. Instead, the managers seemed calm. One of them slid a paper across the table. These are the project results from the last 6 months, they explained. I looked down at the page. The numbers were familiar. They were from several assignments I had worked on. But something caught my attention immediately. Every project listed had been completed earlier than expected. Every budget had stayed under the limit. And every customer satisfaction score was high. Very high. I looked up confused. I don't understand, I said. Another manager smiled slightly for the first time. That's exactly why we called you here. They opened another document. This company tracks performance very carefully, they explained. Not just mistakes but results. My heart began beating faster again. But everyone outside seems to think I'm in trouble, I said carefully. The director gave a small laugh. That rumor started this morning. Why? Asked. The managers exchanged knowing looks. Because today's meeting was marked as urgent, one explained. And people tend to assume the worst. I thought about the worried faces in the office. The whispers. The sympathetic looks. Everyone had already decided my fate. But the director wasn't finished speaking yet. They closed the folder and leaned back in their chair. Actually, they said calmly, we called you here for a very different reason. And suddenly, my worst day didn't feel so certain anymore. The director looked at the other managers before speaking again. We have been observing your work quietly for some time, they said. I sat still, listening carefully. At first, you were simply doing your job well, another manager added. Then something interesting happened. What? Asked. You started solving problems that weren't even assigned to you. I blinked in surprise. I had never thought much about those moments. If a project was stuck, I tried to help. If someone needed support, I stayed late to fix the issue. Had always felt like the right thing to do. The director opened the folder again. We tracked every project you helped improve, they said. More pages appeared in front of me. Each one showed numbers and timelines. And next to several tasks were small notes. Resolved ahead of schedule. Cost reduced. Client satisfaction improved. My mind struggled to process everything. I was just doing my job, I said quietly. One of the managers smiled. Most people only do what they are asked to do. You did more. Another manager added something unexpected. Several coworkers also recommended you during internal feedback reviews. That shocked me. I had assumed many people barely noticed my work. But apparently they had. The director closed the folder again and folded their hands. Leadership isn't always loud, they said. Sometimes it's simply the person who keeps everything running. Outside the conference room, more shadows moved behind the glass. The entire office was probably still guessing what was happening inside. But none of them knew the truth yet. And neither did I. Because the director was about to reveal something even bigger. The director leaned forward slightly. We believe you are ready for more responsibility, they said. The words hung in the air. More responsibility could mean many things. Extra task, a new project, or something much bigger. One of the managers placed another document in front of me. This company is expanding, they explained. We're opening a new operations team next quarter. I nodded slowly, trying to follow. But building a team requires someone who understands the work, another manager said. And someone who earns trust. My heartbeat grew louder in my ears. The director finally spoke again. That's why we have been reviewing your performance so carefully. I looked around the table. For serious faces watched me closely. Then the director said the sentence that changed everything. We would like you to lead the new team. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Lead the team. I repeated. Yes, the director confirmed calmly. That position includes a promotion and a salary increase. My mind went completely blank. Outside the glass walls, the office workers still believed something terrible was happening. They were probably expecting me to walk out with bad news. Instead, the meeting they thought would destroy my career was about to transform it. I took a deep breath, still trying to process the moment. Because the day everyone believed would be my worst had just begun turning into the most important day of my life. For a few seconds I could not speak. Lead the new team. The words kept repeating in my mind. The director noticed my silence and smiled slightly. I know this is unexpected, they said. That's an understatement, I replied honestly. One of the managers slid the document closer to me. This role would place you in charge of a new operations unit, they explained. 5 team members at first, possibly more later. I looked down at the paper again. The position title was clearly written there. Team Operations Supervisor. My chest felt tight, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from disbelief. Just 30 minutes ago, I had walked into the office thinking I might lose my job. Now they were offering me a leadership role. How soon would this start? I asked. Immediately, the director replied. Immediately, I repeated. They nodded. The company wants the new team prepared before the next quarter begins. One of the managers added something else. But we want to be clear. Leadership also comes with challenges. I nodded slowly. I understand. They exchanged another quick glance before continuing. There will be people in the office who expected this position to go to someone else. I had already suspected that. Large promotions rarely happened quietly. Some may not be happy about it, the manager said. I took a breath and nodded again. I'll handle it. The director smiled slightly. That's exactly why we chose you. They stood up and extended their hand. Congratulations. I shook it carefully. But the real challenge hadn't started yet. Because outside that conference room door, the office was still waiting for bad news. When I stepped out of the conference room, the entire office looked up. The whispers stopped instantly. I could feel dozens of eyes watching me. Some looked curious. Some looked nervous. A few even looked relieved, like they believed they had predicted my downfall. One coworker leaned toward another and whispered something. I walked calmly back to my desk. No one spoke directly to me yet. Finally someone asked the question everyone was thinking. So, what happened? The room became quiet again. I placed my notebook on the desk and turned toward them. It was a review meeting, I said simply. That answer confused them. A review? Another person asked. Yes. They waited for more details. But before I could continue, an email notification appeared on every computer in the office. The subject line read, Internal announcement. Leadership update. People started opening the message immediately. Within seconds, surprised voices filled the room. What? Wait, seriously? This can't be right. I opened the email as well, even though I already knew what it said. The message was short but clear. The company was launching a new operations team. And I had been appointed to lead it. Slowly, heads turned in my direction again. This time the expressions were very different. Some looked impressed. Some looked shocked. And a few looked very unhappy. One person across the room closed their laptop with a loud snap. Another shook their head in disbelief. That was when I realized something important. The promotion might have been exciting, but it was also about to make my work life much more complicated. By lunchtime, the entire office knew about the promotion. Some coworkers came to congratulate me. You deserve it, one said. I always knew you worked harder than anyone, another added. Their support felt genuine and I appreciated it. But not everyone reacted the same way. Across the room, a few people avoided eye contact. One person who had been with the company longer than me looked especially upset. They had probably expected the leadership role for themselves. That afternoon, the director called me back to their office. We expected mixed reactions, they said calmly. I noticed, I replied. They smiled slightly. That's part of leadership. They then handed me another folder. This contains your first assignment. I opened it carefully. Inside were documents describing a project that had been delayed for months. Budget problems, scheduling issues, client complaints. Looked messy. Why give this to a new team? I asked. Because it's the perfect test, the director said. If you can fix this situation, the new department will start strong. I nodded slowly. And if I can't? The director shrugged slightly. Then we learn something. That answer was honest, but it also meant pressure. A lot of pressure. As I walked back to my desk with the folder in my hands, I could feel the office watching again. Some people probably hoped I would succeed. Others were probably waiting for me to fail. Either way, the promotion had just turned into a challenge. And the real work was about to begin. That evening I stayed in the office long after most people had left. The delayed project file lay open across my desk. The deeper I read, the more complicated it looked. Deadlines had been missed. Communication between departments had broken down. Several key details were incomplete. It wasn't just a small problem. It was a tangled mess. I rubbed my eyes and kept reading. Eventually a pattern started appearing. Many of the delays weren't caused by lack of effort. They were caused by confusion. Different teams had been working without clear coordination. That meant something important. The problem wasn't the workers. The problem was leadership. And now that responsibility belonged to me. The next morning I called a meeting with everyone involved in the project. Some arrived curious. Others arrived skeptical. One person even crossed their arms before sitting down. "So what's the plan?" someone asked. I stood in front of the room and looked around. "First we start fresh," I said. That sentence caught their attention. "What does that mean?" another asked. "It means we forget the old timeline and create a new one," I explained. Murmurs filled the room. Then I continued. "Everyone will know exactly what their role is. And every step will be clear." Slowly, the tension in the room started fading. People began asking questions. Ideas started flowing. For the first time, the project actually felt possible. But as the meeting ended, I noticed something. One person had remained completely silent. And the look on their face suggested they weren't happy about the new leadership at all. Over the next few weeks, the project slowly started improving. Tasks that had once taken days were now finished in hours. Communication between teams became smoother. Even the client began sending positive feedback. For the first time in months, the project had real momentum. But the tension in the office hadn't disappeared completely. One afternoon I discovered something strange. A key document for the project had been changed without notice. The updated version contained incorrect information. If we had used it, the entire schedule would have collapsed again. I checked the system records. Someone had edited the file late at night. My stomach tightened. Was it an accident? Or something else? The next morning I called the team together. "Someone modified an important document," I explained calmly. People exchanged surprised looks. "Do you know who?" someone asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." Silence filled the room. Then I added something important. "But mistakes happen." Several people relaxed slightly. "We're going to correct the file and continue working." The meeting ended without drama. But later that day, I quietly checked the system logs again. This time I saw the username attached to the change. The person who had been silent during the earlier meeting. The same person who had expected the promotion before I received it. For a moment I simply stared at the screen. The promotion had clearly created enemies. And now I faced a decision. How I handled this moment would define the kind of leader I became. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The system clearly showed who had changed the document. It was the same coworker who had stayed silent during the meeting. The same one who had closed their laptop loudly when the promotion email was announced. For a moment, anger rose inside me. If the mistake had not been caught in time, the entire project could have collapsed again. But I forced myself to breathe slowly. Reacting too quickly would not help. Instead, I quietly restored the correct version of the file and continued working. The next morning I called the team together again. "We need to double-check all shared documents before using them," I said calmly. Several people nodded. The coworker I suspected sat quietly, avoiding my eyes. I didn't accuse anyone. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the project. Day by day the schedule improved. Tasks that once seemed impossible were finally being completed. Even the client began sending positive messages. "Good progress," one email said. "Much better communication." Still, something inside the office felt tense. Some people were waiting for the project to succeed. Others were still hoping it would fail. Late one evening, as I prepared to leave the office, my phone rang. It was the director. "We just received a message from the client," they said. My heart skipped. What kind of message? The director paused. There's a serious problem. My stomach tightened instantly. What happened? I asked. The client says a key delivery is missing, the director explained. That delivery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I looked at the project schedule on my desk. If the delivery was missing, the entire project could stop again. And this time, everyone would blame the new team leader. Me. I rushed back to my desk and opened the project files. The delivery was clearly listed in the schedule. It was supposed to arrive the next morning. But the client's message said they had received nothing. Something didn't make sense. I called the supplier immediately. After a few minutes, someone answered. The shipment left yesterday afternoon, they explained. Do you have the tracking number? I asked. Yes. I wrote it down quickly and checked the shipping system. My eyes widened. The package had been delivered. But not to the client. It had been redirected to a different address. An address that belonged to our own office building. Confusion filled my mind. Why would someone redirect the shipment here? Then another thought appeared. Unless it had been done on purpose. I hurried to the storage area downstairs. Several large boxes were stacked near the back wall. One of them had the same tracking number. My heart pounded. If this delivery had stayed hidden overnight, the client would have believed we failed again. And the new team leader would have taken the blame. I quickly called the director. The shipment is here, I said. What do you mean? They asked. It was redirected to our building, I explained. There was silence for a moment. Then the director spoke slowly. Bring it to the client immediately. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. Within minutes, I arranged a delivery vehicle. The package was sent out right away. By the time I returned to my desk, one question kept repeating in my mind. Who had redirected the shipment? And why? Because now the situation felt less like an accident, and more like sabotage. The next morning the client confirmed the delivery had arrived. Their message sounded relieved. Thank you for resolving the issue quickly. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The project had survived another crisis. But the mystery of the redirected shipment still bothered me. Later that day I checked the system logs again. Just like the edited document, the shipment redirect had also been recorded. And once again, the same username appeared. The coworker who had expected the promotion. For a moment I closed my eyes. This was no longer a coincidence. Someone had been trying to make the project fail. And by extension trying to make me fail. The question was how to handle it. Reporting the situation immediately might create a serious conflict inside the team. Ignoring it could allow the sabotage to continue. I needed to think carefully. That afternoon I asked the coworker to meet me privately. They entered the small meeting room with a cautious expression. You wanted to talk? They asked. Yes, I replied calmly. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. The system logs were clearly visible. Their username appeared beside both incidents. Edited document. The redirected shipment. For a few seconds they said nothing. Then they looked at me and sighed. You figured it out, they said quietly. I nodded. Yes. Silence filled the room. Finally they spoke again. I thought that promotion should have been mine. Their voice carried frustration. I worked here longer. I know, I said. They looked surprised by my calm response. But trying to sabotage the project won't change the decision, I added. They lowered their eyes. For the first time they looked ashamed. The room stayed silent for several seconds. Finally the coworker spoke again. I didn't think it would go this far, they admitted quietly. I watched them carefully. Redirecting a shipment and editing documents can damage the entire project, I said. I know that now, they replied. Their voice sounded different. Less angry. More tired. For a moment I considered reporting everything immediately. The company had strict rules about this kind of behavior. But another thought entered my mind. Leadership wasn't just about punishment. It was about solving problems. What you did was serious, I said. They nodded. I understand. But the project is still moving forward, I continued. And we still need everyone working together. They looked at me confused. You're not reporting me. I haven't decided yet, I replied honestly. The tension in the room remained. Then I said something that surprised both of us. You have experience with this project, I said. And your ideas during earlier stages were actually good. Their eyes widened slightly. I noticed, I added. If you want to prove yourself, help fix the project instead of breaking it. For a long moment they didn't answer. Then slowly they nodded. I'll help, they said. I closed the laptop and stood up. Good. As we walked back to the main office, I realized something important. This moment could have created a bigger conflict. Instead, it might become a turning point. But there was still one final challenge ahead. Because the project's final presentation to the directors was only a few days away. And that meeting would decide everything. The final presentation day arrived faster than expected. By morning, the office felt tense. Everyone knew the project had struggled for months before the new team took over. Now the directors would decide whether the situation had truly improved. I stood in the conference room preparing the presentation slides. Charts showed the progress made during the past few weeks. Schedules had been reorganized. Budgets were back under control. Client satisfaction had improved again. But none of that mattered if the directors weren't convinced. One by one, the leadership team entered the room. The director who had promoted me sat near the center of the table. Several other senior managers joined as well. When everyone was seated, the meeting began. I started explaining the changes our team had made. How communication between departments had been reorganized. How delivery schedules were tracked more carefully. How responsibilities were clearly assigned. At first the room remained quiet. Then questions started. Some were difficult. Some were skeptical. But I answered each one calmly. After nearly an hour, the presentation ended. Silence filled the room. The directors exchanged a few quiet comments between themselves. Finally, the department director looked up at me. Well, they said slowly. This project looked impossible 2 months ago. They paused before continuing. Now it's one of the most organized operations we've seen this year. A small smile appeared on their face. Which proves something important. Waited. The room stayed silent. Then the director finished the sentence. Promoting you was the right decision. And in that moment, I knew the day everyone once believed would destroy my career had truly become the day that changed it forever. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after the director spoke. Then one of the senior managers nodded. I agree, they said. The recovery on this project is impressive. Another manager flipped through the printed reports in front of them. These numbers speak for themselves, they added. I felt a wave of relief move through my chest. For weeks I had worked late nights trying to rebuild a project that many people believed was already doomed. Now the results were finally visible. The director looked around the table. Does anyone have further concerns? They asked. No one spoke. That silence felt like the final confirmation. The meeting ended shortly after. As I walked out of the conference room, several coworkers looked up immediately. They had clearly been waiting to hear the outcome. One person stood up quickly. Well, they asked. I allowed a small smile. The project is moving forward, I said. A few people clapped softly. Others nodded with approval. Even the coworker who had once tried to sabotage the work approached me later that afternoon. You handled that presentation well, they said quietly. Thank you, I replied. There was a short pause. I meant what I said before, they continued. I'll help make this project succeed. I could see sincerity in their expression now. People sometimes made mistakes when pride got in the way. But they could also learn from those mistakes. Then let's focus on the next stage, I said. Because while the presentation had been successful, the real work of leading a team was only beginning. The following weeks moved quickly. With the director's approval, the project gained new support from other departments. Resources that had once been delayed now arrived on time. Communication between teams improved even further. For the first time since the project began, everything seemed to be running smoothly. One morning the director stopped by my desk. "I have good news," they said. I looked up from my computer. "The client has officially approved the next phase of the project." "That's great," I replied. They nodded. "And they specifically mentioned the improvements your team made." Hearing that felt rewarding. Client recognition meant the work had real impact beyond the office. Later that day, the team gathered for a short meeting. I shared the news with them. Smiles appeared around the room. Even the coworkers who had once doubted the new leadership seemed encouraged now. One of them spoke up. "I think we finally turned this around." He nodded. "We did it together." That sentence mattered. Leadership wasn't about standing above everyone else. It was about making sure everyone moved forward together. The team returned to their desks with renewed energy. Watching them work, I felt something different than before. Not just relief. Not just pride. But confidence. The promotion had once felt like a huge responsibility. Now it felt like an opportunity. And the team was starting to believe in that opportunity too. A month later, the company held its quarterly staff meeting. These meetings usually focused on updates and announcements. But this one felt slightly different. Everyone gathered in the main conference hall. Rows of chairs filled the room. The director stood at the front beside a large screen. After reviewing several company updates, they paused. "There is one more announcement," they said. People looked up with curiosity. "Recently, one of our most challenging projects experienced a major turnaround." I sat quietly in my seat, already guessing where this might lead. The director continued. 2 months ago, the situation looked extremely difficult. Few people nodded. Many in the room remembered the project's problems. But strong leadership and teamwork completely changed the outcome, the director added. Then they looked directly in my direction. "I would like to recognize the person who led that transformation." My coworkers turned their heads toward me. For a moment I felt slightly embarrassed. The director smiled. "Please stand." I stood slowly. Applause filled the room. It wasn't loud at first. Then more people joined in. Even some of the coworkers who had once doubted me were clapping now. The director finished the announcement with one final sentence. "This is exactly the kind of leadership we want in this company." Hearing those words made the entire journey feel real. The worst day everyone expected had truly become something very different. After the meeting, several coworkers approached me in the hallway. "Congratulations," one said. "You handled that project better than anyone expected," another added. I thanked them politely. But the person whose reaction mattered most was the coworker who had once tried to sabotage the project. They waited until the hallway cleared before speaking. "You earned that recognition," they said honestly. "Thank you," I replied. They looked slightly uncomfortable for a moment. "I regret how I acted before," they admitted. "I let my disappointment turn into something negative." He nodded. "Everyone faces moments like that." They looked surprised. "You're not angry about it anymore?" "I was," I admitted. But holding on to that anger wouldn't help the team. A small smile appeared on their face. "I'm glad you became the leader," they said. That sentence meant more than I expected. Because it showed something important. Even people who once stood against you could change their perspective. And sometimes the best way to lead was simply to stay calm and keep moving forward. A few days later, the director called me back into their office. This time the atmosphere felt very different from the first meeting weeks earlier. The director sat comfortably behind the desk. "I've been reviewing the team's progress," they said. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied. They nodded. "The results are strong." For a moment they studied a document on their desk. Then they looked back at me. "You handled a difficult situation well." "Thank you," I said. They leaned back slightly. "Which is why we're considering something else." My curiosity grew immediately. "What kind of consideration?" The director smiled. "Our company plans to expand operations next year." "That sounds exciting," I said. It is, they agreed. But expansion requires experienced leaders. They paused briefly. And you've shown that you can handle pressure, solve problems, and guide a team. My mind began connecting the pieces. You're thinking about another role? Yes. The director nodded slowly. We are thinking about it. I sat quietly, processing the possibility. The promotion I received only weeks earlier had already changed my career. But now it seemed like the journey was far from finished. Because the day that once looked like my worst day had become the first step in something even bigger. After leaving the director's office, my mind felt full of questions. The conversation had been short, but the message behind it was clear. Something bigger might be coming. Still, I didn't allow myself to think too far ahead. The current project still needed my full attention. The team continued working hard every day. Tasks were completed on schedule. Client feedback remained positive. The atmosphere in the office had also changed. People who once doubted the promotion now treated me with more respect. One afternoon, while reviewing reports at my desk, I noticed the coworker who had once tried to sabotage the project standing nearby. "Do you have a minute?" they asked. "Of course," I replied. They sat down and placed a document on my desk. "I worked on the next phase timeline," they said. I looked through the pages. The plan was detailed and well organized. "This is very good work," I said. They smiled slightly. I figured the best way to fix my earlier mistakes was to help make the project even stronger. He nodded. "That's exactly what leadership is about." They looked surprised. "Leadership?" "Yes," I said. "Helping others succeed." For a moment they seemed thoughtful. Then they stood up. "Thank you for giving me another chance." As they walked away, I realized something important. Leadership wasn't just about promotions or titles. It was about creating an environment where people could grow, even after mistakes. And our team was finally starting to grow together. 2 weeks later, the project reached its final stage. The client scheduled a large review meeting with company leadership. Everyone understood how important this moment was. Months earlier, this project had nearly collapsed. Now it had become one of the company's strongest operations. The meeting room filled with executives, managers, and team members. The client joined through a video screen at the front of the room. I presented the final results carefully. Charts showed improved delivery times. Budgets were stable. Customer satisfaction had increased significantly. When the presentation ended, the client spoke. "We are very impressed with the transformation," they said. Several executives exchanged approving looks. The client continued. "We would like to extend our contract for the next 2 years." A wave of excitement moved through the room. Extending the contract meant more work, more growth, and greater trust between the companies. But then the client added something unexpected. "We also want the same team leadership for the next phase." For a moment the room became very quiet. Everyone knew who that meant. The director smiled slightly. "That will not be a problem," they replied. The meeting ended with applause. As people began leaving the room, I realized something powerful. The project that almost destroyed my career had now become the biggest success I had ever been part of. Later that afternoon, the director called me into their office again. This time another executive was sitting beside them. "Please sit," the director said. I took a seat, feeling curious. The executive opened a folder on the desk. "You've handled this project extremely well," they said. "Thank you," I replied. They nodded. "But we didn't call you here only to discuss the project." My attention sharpened. The director continued speaking. "As the company prepares for expansion, we need someone to lead a larger operations department." I listened carefully. "That department will oversee several teams instead of just one." The executive looked directly at me. "We believe you're ready for that responsibility." For a moment I simply stared at them. The meaning of their words slowly settled in. "You're offering another promotion?" "Yes." The director smiled. "Yes. The new role would involve supervising multiple teams and managing major company projects." Just a few months earlier, I had worried about losing my job. Now I was being asked to take on an even bigger leadership position. "We don't expect an answer immediately," the executive said. "But we wanted to offer you the opportunity first." I took a deep breath. The journey from that stressful meeting weeks earlier suddenly felt very far away. That evening I stayed in the office after most people had gone home. The building was quiet. City lights shone through the large windows. I sat at my desk thinking about everything that had happened. Only a few months earlier, people believed my career might collapse. Some coworkers had expected me to fail. Some had even tried to make sure I failed. But instead of collapsing, the situation had pushed me to grow. Every challenge had forced me to become stronger, calmer, and more patient. Now a bigger opportunity stood in front of me. The next morning I returned to the director's office. "I've made my decision," I said. They looked up. "And I'm ready for the challenge." A smile spread across their face. "I thought you might say that." The executive beside them nodded approvingly. "Congratulations," they said. "This will be an important role for the company's future." As I walked out of the office, I felt something powerful. Not just excitement, not just pride, but clarity. The day everyone thought would be my worst day had truly changed everything. Because sometimes the moments that look like disasters are actually the beginning of something greater. Months later, I often thought back to that first meeting. The one where everyone expected bad news. The whispers, the worried looks, the quiet tension across the office. People believed my career might end that day. But life rarely moves in straight lines. Sometimes the hardest moments reveal your true strength. The new leadership role brought many challenges. I now supervised multiple teams and handled larger company projects. But the lessons from that first project never left me. Stay calm under pressure. Listen to people. Solve problems instead of blaming others. And most importantly, never let fear decide your future. One afternoon, during another company meeting, a new employee approached me afterward. "I heard the story about how you started leading this department," they said. I smiled slightly. "Stories tend to grow over time." They laughed. "But it's inspiring," they added. I appreciated that. Because the real lesson wasn't about promotions or titles. It was about perspective. The day that once looked like the worst moment of my career had actually been the turning point that built everything else. And that realization stayed with me every day. Because sometimes the door that looks like it's closing on your future is actually opening a much bigger one.